There are spring traditions that feel less like events and more like rituals, moments when a place opens itself up quite literally to be seen. I'm joined today by Karen Ellsworth, Director of Historic Garden Week, and Virginia Gillock, Board Member and State Chair, to explore the history and enduring significance of Historic Garden Week across the Commonwealth of Virginia. Since its beginnings nearly a century ago, Historic Garden Week has invited visitors beyond garden gates and into private landscapes, historic homes, and communities that are rarely accessible to the public. What began as a vision rooted in preservation and hospitality has become one of the state's most beloved spring traditions. Today, we talk about the origins of the event, why people continue to show up year after year, and what it feels like to steward a tradition that unfolds differently in every region. This episode is about spring, place, and the quiet generosity of opening one's home and garden to others. Enjoy! Welcome to Grandma's Silver, where tradition meets today. I'm Allie, your host of the Grandma Silver podcast and founder of the Grand Millennial Lifestyle. Here, we blend aesthetics with nostalgia, engaging in conversations with lifestyle brands, designers, and more to rediscover the timeless charm of the past. Join me as we journey from home to heart, illuminating the past and polishing the present with the gleam of Grandma Silver. I have Karen and Virginia here today. I'm really excited to chat with you both. Before I launch into what I'm sure is going to be an exciting conversation, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves because I think with the both of you being here, it'll just help listeners to identify your name to your voice as we proceed. So did one of you want to kick off?
Sure, I'll start. Virginia Gillock. I am the Historic Garden Week State Chair. I'm in my second year, which means I'm feeling a little more used to it and confident because it's a big job and it's an exciting job. But anyway, I will finish and my co-chair will step into my shoes in May.
And I am Karen Ellsworth. I am actually on the staff at the Garden Club of Virginia, which produces Historic Garden Week. And my title is Director of Historic Garden Week, and I'm also editor of its guidebook.
Virginia, I have to ask, state chair, how does this work? How does the hierarchy of all of this come together?
That's a good question. The state chair means that I oversee Historic Garden Week on the volunteer side. That's her staff position. I oversee all the volunteers. We have 48 member clubs and lots of numbers involved with Historic Garden Week. But basically every year we put on Historic Garden Week. There are 29 tours, 130 properties. It takes place over 8 days, the third week in April. And there are a lot of people involved with this process in a cyclical fashion. So every year, and it's a little complicated because not every little region of Virginia does a tour every year. Some every other year, some share with other groups. But all in all, every year, approximately 29 tours take place.
Wow.
And every tour has a chair and a co-chair and multiple committees. And then we divide into 5 regions, and those regions are, the central area, the south, the north, the west, the east. We have region representatives who sort of keep tabs on the chairs. How's it going? Making sure they're getting done what they need to get done. So it sort of sprinkles down, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at it at the end of the day, we have at least 3,500 volunteers. And honestly, I would say it's in the thousands of volunteers that put this production on every year. So I sort of stay at the top, keeping an eye on how things are going each little step of the way, if that makes sense. Of course, Karen keeps me in line because she is truly directing this wonderful event.
Amazing. How long have you been involved?
Back in 2006, I actually had my house on the garden tour. My kids were little. I think my youngest was in 3rd grade. They all had to go live at somebody else's house for a week.
Yeah, well, you said you had boys, so I believe that.
I had to get the Legos out of the way and the soccer balls and all that. and do a deep clean. And I had an army of people in my garden working on that because for Historic Garden Week, we open the interiors and the gardens. So it's the whole property. Now, some properties will only show their garden, but you see the entire property. So that was in 2006. In 2016, I became the chair of my tour I live in an area of the Shenandoah Valley called Stanton, Virginia. So I was the chair that year. And ever since then, I have just absolutely fallen in love with Historic Garden Week. I go every year. Obviously, I do now because I'm the state chair, but I never miss a tour. I go to as many as I can. There's just so much to learn from it. The architecture, the interior spaces, the decorating, the history of the house, the gardens. It's just an incredible experience. And people really love it. So it's just been a win-win. I can't imagine doing anything better.
Let's talk a little bit about its history.
So the Garden Club of Virginia was founded in 1920. It was a group of civic-minded ladies. They were really interested in conservation, gardening, but also preserving Virginia's history of their historic gardens. So moved to 1927, and I have a great quote, if you don't mind. I'm going to
Yeah.
share this with you. There's a woman named Peggy Cornett who is the curator of plants at Thomas Jefferson's Monticello.
Okay.
And this is what she said. In 1927, the president of the Garden Club of Virginia, her name was Suzanne Massey, alarmed by the state of trees at Monticello, some, here I'm turning my page, some being near the house and those being of the Jeffersonian era, rallied the garden clubs to hold a colorful garden fair on the grounds at Monticello. This successful gala raised $7,000, and the funds were used to preserve the few remaining trees on the lawn of the estate. So
Wow.
that was the first event. The next year, the Garden Club decided to turn their attention to Kenmore. Kenmore is the home of George Washington's sister, Betty Washington Lewis. Those gardens were in a sorry state of disrepair, so they raised the funds for that. And then the next year was the first true year of Historic Garden Week, 1929. And at that point, they decided to open many of these historic homes and gardens, and they opened them for 11 days.
It's a very long time.
11 days. And they wrote notes to all their friends, encouraging them to come to the beautiful state of Virginia at the end of April. And they did produce a guidebook. It sold for $2. And so, really, that was the birth of Historic Garden Week. And the point was, let's have a fundraiser every year. And the funds that we raise, and this is true today, go to preserving and restoring these historic gardens that are found throughout the state of Virginia. Only other thing I wanted to say about Historic Garden Week is we are celebrating our 93rd year this year. We had two occasions where we had to stop, and that was World War II and 2020 for COVID.
I didn't realize, Virginia, that we have been working together for 10 years. I would have met you in 2016 when you were a tour chair. And I think that just really speaks to the longevity and the relationships. I mean, this is all that's how this miracle called Historic Garden Week even comes about. It's the relationships with the homeowners. It's the relationships amongst the clubs themselves, the way that GCV supports the club. It's all pretty amazing. One of the things that I want to talk about a little bit about is the sheer variety of different tours. I mean, Virginia itself, we're so lucky, and I think a lot of people that don't know the state are a little taken aback when they realize that it's the mountains all the way to the ocean. We have large cities, Northern Virginia is right next to DC. Richmond's kind of in the middle, but then there's a lot of rural towns. And the tours really mirror that range and diversity. Basically, there's something for everyone, but there really is. And I think that's the hardest part for a lot of people is just figuring out which tour to go to, because it's impossible to attend every single one of them because we have certain days where there are multiple tours and some of them are at one end of the state versus the other. So, I mean, even the horticulture signature zones. Virginia, you're the gardener, so did I say that right?
You did.
There's four different zones. So there's that sort of variety too. What's blooming in Northern Virginia is going to be very, very different than what would be blooming down in Virginia Beach, literally during the exact same week.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge undertaking. And there is such variety and it looks so different.
I tell people that come every year, I'm like, you could come to the same tour every single year because this, I think, is very unique with Historic Garden Week versus other house and garden tours, because obviously there's a lot of organizations that use this as a fundraiser, and a lot of them, they're the same properties that are open over and over again. So you could come to Historic Garden Week every single year and see different properties, and I think that's why we have so many people that have been doing this. It's a tradition. They do it with their mother, they do it with their college roommates, it's something that they come every year.
Another part that I really love about it is that we have so many loyal visitors that they have it on their calendar. They can't wait for the guidebook to come out, which it just came out yesterday. So this is a super exciting time. I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. It's like I don't even know what I would compare it to. It's almost like that whatever you're waiting for in the mail. I guess now maybe you've ordered something and you're waiting for it to arrive. So when the guidebook comes, we have so many loyal visitors that can't wait to get their hands on the guidebook, and then they can look at it and plan what they're going to do. So today I'm going to do this, tomorrow I'm going to do this, on Wednesday I'm going to do this. But of course, now our website is equally as beautiful, and you can look at that, over the summer and the fall and into Christmas and, sort of get an idea from that perspective.
When we were talking, I think Karen, you mentioned, you mail it out, and I was thinking it sort of reminds me of like that excitement of getting something in the mail, like akin to the old pre-Christmas Sears catalog, right? Like that,
Oh, yeah.
that anticipatory catalog. And so that was something that kind of crossed my mind. So it's funny, Virginia, that you just said that. Like, what would you compare it to? Because my brain was like, oh, I feel like a kid again, like this, how fun to leaf through and really settle in with something and get excited about something that you're going through. So you might have kind of answered this already, but in case you have more to add, I wanted to ask, we talk a lot about tradition, legacy here.
Yes.
93 years, give or take a couple of big world events. Why do we feel that this has endured for so long? And I think you kind of touched on that a little bit as far as why people continue to come back. But do we want to add anything extra?
This is kind of corny to say, but it's true. I feel like it has that wonderful Virginia tradition of graciousness and hospitality. You might see it in different ways. The women and the men that you meet in Virginia Beach, of course, are different than the people you're going to meet in Richmond or the people you'll meet in Charlottesville or Old Town Alexandria or down in Lake Gaston, the Brunswick area. So there's a lot of diversity, but one thing everyone has in common is you will be welcomed with a big smile and a genuine happiness to see you.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, people come into the house and we have hostesses that are ready to say, welcome to whatever the name of the house is. And let me tell you a little bit about it. This house was built in 1820. And this was the family that lived here. And this is what they did. And then it was added on to in, 1875. So there's so many beautiful older homes in Virginia. But of course, every tour is different. So you might get something that's modern mixed in with something that's older.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, the hostesses and the volunteers really go the extra step. They'll make homemade cookies, they'll serve lemonade. Oh, it's hot out. Can I get you some fresh, cold water? And it's just the hospitality is, I think, what really makes it special.
I think Virginia, that was just such a beautiful answer because it's so true. I was laughing though. I was thinking about how the experience of touring in 2026 would probably be very, very similar to the experience of touring in 1929. And I mean, how amazing is that as a statement? But at the same time, I mean, I've seen pictures of what the visitors looked like in the 50s, and they're wearing hats and they've got gloves. And, when we have our frequently asked questions and we've got our tour guidelines, like we're advocating for very practical shoes and, don't forget your sunscreen and bring your umbrella. And so, I mean, I think that part has changed. And, and also an acknowledgement, I wanted to make sure that we mentioned our new children's ticket that's new for 2026. And so our audience, we wanted to make the event more approachable for younger parents that would be able to, not think twice about bringing their 5 to 17-year-old. So we have this children's ticket. We're really excited to see how that's approached with our visitors.
Babies and children have always been included. So we're trying to think of a way to make it more accessible for
Mhm.
a young family. And certainly, for instance, Allie, if you came to Virginia, which we would welcome you with open arms, if you have a little way to carry the baby, no
Mhm.
strollers, because we're very respectful of our homeowners. But, babies come and go on tours as well. It is family friendly. We do require sturdy shoes because there's a lot of walking involved. Most houses only open their first floor, but the gardens, that's extensive. That could require quite a bit of walking up and down steps sometimes, patios. But I did also want to say something that's not new to Historic Garden Week, but I should say we're emphasizing a little more of acknowledgement of how important conservation is and using native plants in your gardens, pollinator plants.
Mhm.
We have a big movement going with members and their friends and family and communities where more and more people are planting natives to attract, bees and butterflies. And we have a great collaboration going with the bee cities. This year, we have new signage that says, if you're in a garden that incorporates native plants, it says native plants grow here. And we have a smaller sign where you can actually write the name of the plant because our visitors want to know that plant is
Mhm.
beautiful. What is it called? How do you grow it? Does it grow from seed? Is it a bulb? That sort of thing.
The event blends a lot of things itself, right? It has there's beauty. You're also looking at interiors, exteriors. You're looking at preservation, conservation, but then you're also educating and inspiring. There's attention to detail in every way someone might interact with the space. I want to bounce around for 1 second since we're sort of talking about visitor experience. What can people expect, particularly this year?
I will begin just to say this is a really special year, 2026. So, for those of you who don't know, this is the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And none other than Thomas Jefferson, who was the author of the Declaration, happened to make his home in Virginia at Monticello. So we also have Mount Vernon, which was George Washington's home. We have Montpelier, which was James Madison's home. We have the St. John's Church, where Patrick Henry made his, give me liberty or give me death. So those are all actually restoration sites that the Garden Club of Virginia has helped to restore over the years. And also, these sites will be open. To me, it's a wonderful alignment of what is important to the Garden Club of Virginia, but what is important to our country, the founding fathers. I think it's going to be a great opportunity for visitors to sort of see that connection.
I couldn't help myself. I wrote a press release the other day, and I was sort of telling that story, and I said "seeds of a nation." I mean, it just
Oh, I
the
love
pun was right there. I just had to go for it.
that.
One thing we haven't mentioned, and this is something that we do every year, but we haven't mentioned the flower arrangements, and that is, I would say, very, very special for Historic Garden Week. I don't know that we're the only house and garden tour that do the flower arrangements, but when I'm talking to people, especially from outside of the state that don't really know the event, I oftentimes will find myself saying, this is not a couple of stems in a vase. This is like you walk in and you think a wedding is about to happen. Artistic design, flower arranging is a very big component of the overall organization, and the Garden Club of Virginia hosts flower shows where people win blue ribbons and silver plates with their names engraved on them. So these arrangers are very, very talented in terms of being able to promote seasonal plants and natives. We're really spending a lot of time talking to the volunteers and the members about, using the flower arrangements to showcase the native plants and the seasonal plants and locally grown, and kind of having that messaging be reinforced by their experience.
Absolutely. And it's also, our visitors will come inside a house and they'll see an arrangement and they'll think, oh, I can do that. That looks like, I'd like to try that myself, of course, because we have kitchen arrangements, beautiful arrangements for the dining room table. And as Karen said, arrangers, we have experienced arrangers that team up with inexperienced arrangers. So it's sort of this learning experience also.
Mhm.
And then we have little cards that tell you what's in the arrangement. But we do not permit photography inside the house. And that's just out of respect for the homeowner and their privacy. But we do make sure that we take beautiful photos of the arrangements and we post them on Facebook. So I always say to people, don't worry, that arrangement over there that you can't wait to try in your own house will be on Facebook and you can, look it up then and learn from that.
Also, kind of going off of experience, and I don't want to forget to ask this, you touched on the fact that this is statewide, different regions, and how different those regions are from one another. And so I'm curious how what spring looks like in each region might impact the overall experience that someone might expect when visiting.
That's a really good question. I will say, just from someone who is a gardener and likes to grow things, I'm not a great arranger, but I do my best. I do my best. So I will say, for instance, let's take the daffodil. Daffodils that are blooming in the coastal areas, the Northern Neck, Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Newport News, they may come out more toward the beginning of April. So when Historic Garden Week comes along the third week in April, you can pick your daffodils and keep them in the refrigerator for about 2 weeks, I think. So you may see a few in arrangements. But then you go over to the west side of the state, which is, once you're in Charlottesville and then you cross the Blue Ridge Mountains, you have Stanton, Harrisonburg, Roanoke, Lynchburg, a lot of beautiful, areas in the mountains. Those daffodils might be just coming up, and they're early daffodils in, middle season and late season. So I think you see that in the gardens, and I think it really depends on, where you're going. In other words, the coastal towns are a little sooner and a little warmer. The mountain towns might be a little later and a little cooler.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think is really fun about it is the diversity of the land and also the diversity of the properties.
That diversity is also educational in highlighting sort of what is going on with the land at the time, what stage the garden is in.
Absolutely. And we have so many people that are horticulturists that come on these tours to see the gardens. And the gardens do not disappoint. You
Mhm.
may see them in various stages. Maybe that, cherry is not blossoming yet. Maybe it's about to open. And as I said, maybe it's already opened, over in, where the tour was last year was in Irvington, which is near the Tides Inn, and everything was in bloom. Or you might see things about to open up, in Charlottesville, which is right off the Blue Ridge Mountains in that beautiful kind of Piedmont area. And also, I think the sheer variety of gardens. So, Old Town Alexandria has these charming sort of urban gardens. What can you do with this space? Their tour is usually a walking tour. And I'm only picking on a few tours as examples, but this coming year, Charlottesville will feature some working farms. And those are quite a lot of gardens that will be different. You might have an herb garden, you might have a vegetable garden, you might have, an orchard to walk through. So I think for someone who is a gardener at heart and also wants to learn
Mhm.
techniques, there's just so much to learn from. And usually we have someone in the garden who can answer questions. And I think visitors appreciate that too.
I talk with a lot of folks who are in the interiors realm. I also talk with a lot of museums, and I know a lot about sort of this interpretation for educational spaces. And something that I find interesting is that you're weaving a lot of education and storytelling into the spaces that you are highlighting as well, particularly for these spaces that are a kind of this combo of indoor outdoor.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see that duality telling a bigger picture of a story, perhaps, than if you were just to walk through an interior space? And that is not to poo on just interior spaces, right? Because obviously those tell a story. But what do you see the benefit being of opening? Because these spaces have gardens that, without opening the first floor of their home, would be stunning places to visit themselves. So what is the benefit of allowing people inside?
I mean, the interior spaces are so personal, and it's such a gift that these private homeowners are willing to let total strangers walk around and see their curtain choices and their art and their gorgeous fabrics. The gardens and the landscapes, those are a little bit different because they're living classrooms, and they really show, in the same way that the personal spaces might reflect this, just the changes. You've got some that are going to be really formal, you've got some that are more casual. You're going to see a lot of gardens this year. Obviously, the guidebook's out, so we know exactly what's going to be featured, that have really are really featuring native plants and are really paying attention to the bees and the butterflies. Garden spaces, we put the Governor's Palace of Colonial Williamsburg on the cover of the guidebook. That's all about colonial spaces. And you look at those gardens, and it's very obvious that the kitchen gardens were super, super important, that was provided food. They had herbs for medicine. They had, certain plants that were used in dyes. They positioned trees in different places because air conditioning didn't exist. So, the world has changed, the gardens have changed, and I think they're going to subliminally know that story just by walking around in those spaces.
I couldn't agree more. And I couldn't help but say, Karen and I have been reading The Founding Gardeners. And, and if you haven't
Told
read
me
it,
about this book. Yes, I need to read it.
it's wonderful. And just having this conversation makes me think of, I knew Thomas Jefferson was, an incredible gardener, and he was so curious, and he brought so many plants over from Europe and other places. And, he was just an intellect. But George Washington, I guess I didn't realize how passionate he was about his farm and his garden, and how it integrated with his home, which of course he loved his home and he loved the interior of that. But these outdoor garden spaces were so important to the founding fathers. And I feel like for a lot of people now, young families, want to grow their vegetables. Even if they have a tiny little patio, they can still do that in a pot,
Mhm.
that sort of thing. And I feel like there's a movement toward garden spaces and how they connect with your home, and how your home and your garden have a reciprocal relationship.
Yeah, so much inspiration too that, is relatively new. I mean, I think about HGTV, and I'm a big Gardener's World. Monty Don is like my crush. And all these amazing magazines, we get to work with so many of them. Flower Magazine, they're just eye candy, opening up and you want to try it. But I mean, heck, here we are doing our very first podcast. I mean, there's all of this content out there, and YouTube videos, and you can learn how to prune a particular plant. So, I would hope that with Historic Garden Week, just that people would have the opportunity to walk around and then really want to get in their own space, whether it's an interior space or an exterior space, and, implement an idea or try something.
Are there things that you have learned, either as a host or as, someone planning this behind the scenes and just participating, about how people lived and worked and understood beauty? Because it really is, in a way, you're working with timelines too.
The volunteers, the boots on the ground, and there's so many of them, and every one of them is so important. They're the ones that have the relationships in the local community. A lot of them open up their own homes and gardens. We have several tour chairs that are tour chairs and homeowners, which is like two humongous jobs all at the same time. But they're the ones that, put together the tour. They're doing all the nitty-gritty details on the local level.
And the other part that I think we've tried really hard, I've made it my sort of personal goal to help with the procurement process. And that has to do with, what properties are you going to have on your tour? It's all about relationships. I suppose there are some tours that will knock on a door and ask a homeowner, but most of the time there's a relationship there. It's somebody you've been to that house, it's a friend of yours or a friend of a friend, and they have a beautiful garden. You've seen the interior of their house, it's gorgeous. And, we're very respectful of the homeowners. We make sure we have signage that says, watch your step. If there's a step down, we have hostesses in place that, guide people through the home. We're very big on safety for obvious reasons. We want them to have a pleasant experience and a safe experience.
Mhm.
I think what I also wanted to mention was how important community is to Historic Garden Week and the whole state of Virginia. A couple of years back, Historic Garden Week decided to look at this a little more in depth and see how we were helping the state of Virginia economically. And it's called the Economic Impact Study, and it's on our website for anyone who would like to look at it. But basically, what we found out is Historic Garden Week generates, make sure I have my number here correct, Karen, is $13.3 million annually within the state of Virginia. And that's, staying in hotels, going to restaurants, maybe doing a little shopping, in addition to attending Historic Garden Week tours. So it really is a statewide event. The whole state gets involved and communities get involved. It's a great, joyous time.
How does it work? Because you have sort of like these public and private spaces involved. So how does that work? Like you mentioned, Colonial Williamsburg versus someone's private home.
Well, that is up to the individual club, and they decide, committees get together, procurement committees, they say, okay, in 2 years, what kind of tour do we want to have? And so I'm so glad you asked that question because I wanted to tell you, Karen mentioned Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, so they're celebrating their 100-year anniversary. John Rockefeller, decided to restore all of these beautiful buildings that had fallen into some form of neglect. And now 100 years later, they're celebrating that. And they came to us, we have a process where we choose the cover, but they said, we would like to propose the Governor's Palace Gardens. 100-year anniversary. Colonial Williamsburg have been so generous working with us to put this tour on. It's going to happen. It's going to be open for a full day. You can go inside the Governor's Palace for part of it. There is a very exciting project that's happening in the Governor's Palace Garden area. The Garden Club of Virginia is involved in that as well. It's one of our really our latest restoration project. Colonial Williamsburg's 100th anniversary, VA 250, and Historic Garden Week. So it's sort of like all the stars lined up for that tour.
And so that would be the same, like Monticello and so Montpelier, like all these different.
Yes.
Same process.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So the typical tour experience is, I would say, 3 to 5 private homes and gardens. But 2026 just really ended up being an extra special year to be able to overlay all of these properties, which we have these direct connections because the Garden Club of Virginia has been developing these relationships and doing these projects at so many projects or so many properties that directly relate back to the nation's 250th anniversary. And I always like to tell people too, it's not a grant program. We don't stroke checks and say, here, go forth and, you know, do this garden. That is an ongoing relationship. So for many of these, we've done multiple projects. So, Monticello decided they wanted to open, there's all these really special things going on for 250 that I think our visitors are really going to enjoy.
Because these are all historic spaces, historic garden week. We're talking about preservation, conservation. There's a lot of tradition embedded in that and history. So how are we balancing this with a modern audience?
I like that. Let's see, how do we balance that? Well, I would say, going back, and I'm really thinking about my own involvement in Historic Garden Week. As I said, when I first opened my house, my kids were, I think, third grade, fifth grade, and seventh grade. And I had a very sort of modern house. I mean, it wasn't a colonial traditional home. It was a house that was made for a young family.
Mhm.
And I remember saying, "Oh, I couldn't possibly open my house. Who would want to see this?" And I remember the members who asked me said, "You're absolutely wrong. People do want to see this. People want to see how a young family operates, what their spaces look like." So I feel like the tours do try to provide that sort of variety that I think would be so important to all generations.
Mhm.
I think you may see a home that's an empty nester lives in that's more of a retirement home. Maybe the primary bedroom's on the first floor and they have a smaller patio. And then you see working farms where families are raising, cattle, or they have horses, stables, or you might see more of an urban house that has a couple that don't have children at all. Maybe they're in their 30s or 20s or 40s, or maybe they've chosen not to have children. So I think there really is something for everyone. And I think what the Garden Club of Virginia is trying to do is, with education, talk about preserving these, going to our restoration properties, preserving these properties for perpetuity. I mean, for as long as possible. If that means, the English boxwood that got the boxwood blight might need to be removed, we're going to look at the most updated scientific reports that are out, what is going to be the best thing to replace that with. And we have a landscape architect, Thomas Waltz, Nelson Burr Waltz, who works with the Garden Club of Virginia. And that's, again, a restoration topic, but because we're getting into the weeds there. But I think you can see that when you go to these properties for Historic Garden Week, most of the restoration properties are open as well. So you can see what's going on there also. And I can remember going on these tours with my mother and my aunts. And I remember thinking, I would be in middle school and I was thinking, oh, rolling my eyes, I can't believe they're making me do this. And it really had its impact because it really did mean a lot. I may have rolled my eyes and said, I don't want to go, but honestly, I really enjoyed it. There was so much to see. It's so beautiful. As Karen said, the arrangements are so stunningly gorgeous. And who doesn't love a beautiful interior and beautiful art and furnishings? And then to step out into a garden and see what they've done with their garden. I mean, it's just a happy thing to do. It's happy and joyful.
You would have thought that that little girl would be the state chair. We're talking about all the fun that is to be had. So I want to make sure to provide an opportunity so that those listening can figure out how on earth they can be a part of this. Now, I will preface this by saying we will link to things in our show notes. So as we speak in a minute here, you'll be able to find all those resources there. But could we have a quick conversation about what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way for people to learn about Historic Garden Week, if they are unfamiliar with the event, is our website, It's just chock full of information. We have suggested itineraries, with maps. If you're not even familiar with where places are geographically, the entire guidebook, which is 240 pages, but it is available online, directly from our website. You could obviously order one. The ticketing is all done online for the most part. There, we do have some tours that offer local tickets, but I would say the vast majority of people do that in advance. I will say we've talked a lot about, how many different tours there are, and it's statewide, and there's such a diversity. We have lots and lots of people who buy our state pass. That allows access to all 29 tours and gives people a lot of flexibility to, even if you wanted to be ambitious, you could do 2 tours in a day if you wanted to. So all of that is online on our website. And then we have a pretty robust social media program too. So following us on Instagram, Facebook, seeing, beautiful pictures, but being able to link back to ticketing is another good way to kind of make your decision and figure out where in Virginia you want to come and visit.
Well, yes, I will make sure to put all those resources in the show notes so that everyone can find you and follow you, especially as we're getting closer. It is February right now. They will hear this in February. This is a good time to go on there and start looking at those. One of my last questions that I have before we part ways is, again, I like to talk legacy here. And so I would love to hear what it is that you hope visitors get in this very impactful year, this historic year, but also if there's anything that you just generally hope people take away.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that because I feel like the very foundation of Historic Garden Week, people need to remember why we do it and why we do this wonderful 8-day long tours, I should say, is really to raise the funds to restore public historic gardens. And also there is a landscape architect fellowship that we also do. And that person, it's a historic landscape fellowship, and they do research on various areas in Virginia. And so that's why we do it. So there's a lot of thank yous that need to be said. Thank you to the homeowners for being willing to open their homes and properties. Thank you to all the thousands of volunteers that it takes to make this happen, and to the state of Virginia for bringing all these visitors from 16 countries in 42 states. I think that's what we counted last year. And to remember what, the Garden Club of Virginia's mission is. And I'll read the statement because it's a short statement, but I think it really sort of sums it up. The mission is to conserve the gifts of nature, to restore and preserve historic landscapes of the Commonwealth, which is Virginia, to cultivate the knowledge and love of gardening. And I love this last part, to lead future generations to build on this heritage. When the child asks the question, why are we doing this? Well, that's why we do it. And that's why we do it year after year.
I just thank the two of you so much for taking the time to be here today and to speak with me and our listeners, because this is obviously, no pun it, well, maybe Karen, you'll appreciate, here's a pun. I was going to say, this is obviously rooted in tradition. But
well done. Well done.
But I am just
I love that
to talk about it with you.